Hello and welcome to Asian Pacific Affairs. Thank you for joining me today. In this show today, we are going to discuss many aspects of China's Belt and Road Initiative in detail, including its regional and global dimensions. The Belt and Road Initiative led by PRC is the most comprehensive economic pillar of challenging the liberal international order. Although it lagged behind the agenda, like many issues with the pandemic, it has returned to the main topics of the agenda with the latest development in Afghanistan. 8 years inception in 2013, what Belt and Road Initiative means in practice is still coming into focus, but today I have with me on this stage my expert guest, who can help us better understand Beijing aspirations for Belt and Road Initiative within China and other parts of the world to answer the basic question posed by this show. My guest is Jeremy Garlick. Jeremy is a PhD and associate professor at Prague University of Economics and Business and director of the Masaryk Center of International Studies, a research center within the university. He specializes in China's international relations, focusing primarily on the progress and the regional implementation of Belt and Road Initiative. His first book, The Impact of China's Belt and Road Initiative from Asia to Europe, was published by Routledge in 2020. In addition to publications on EU-China relations, he has also published numerous articles on a diverse range of topics related to the BRI, including China's economic diplomacy and regionalising foreign policy. These publications including papers on the China's Pakistan Economic Corridor (CPEC), China's economic diplomacy in Czech Republic, China's strategic hedging in the Persian Gulf, China's normative power drive in Central Asia, and China's relation with India. Dr. Garlick has taught and lectured for 2 decades at institutes of higher education in Asia and Europe, including the University of the Chinese Academy of Science in Beijing and the Ewha Women's University in Seoul. Welcome, Jeremy. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here.
First, Jeremy, I would like to ask, what is the main characteristic of the BRI? Can you please tell us a little bit about the characteristic of BRI?
Sure. Well, it's a very complex phenomenon, so it's difficult to summarize it briefly, but I'll try. I mean, I think we have to bear in mind that there is maybe some differences between the official version of the BRI, what the Chinese say it's for and what they claim it is, and what is actually happening in practice. So I'll try to draw that out, because I think the understanding that most people got from it is, in terms of the Silk Road, the connectivity is what people most think about when they think about the Belt and Road Initiative, the connections, the transport connections, the infrastructure, connecting countries together. And I would say that's what excites a lot of people. I mean, that's what got me interested in it in the early days when people first started talking about it. Obviously, Xi Jinping first announced in 2013, but I think the Belt and Road started getting more publicity in 2015 onwards. And what excited people was the idea of improving connectivity between countries, improving integration between different regions, especially in Asia, where, as we know, anybody who's traveled extensively in Asia, I've traveled through quite a few countries in Asia. It varies across Asia, but there are countries that have very poor transport infrastructure, such as Mongolia that I traveled in, very poor transport infrastructure. Even countries like Laos or Cambodia, right, are very much in need of improving the transport infrastructure. And the connections often across borders, I cross borders by land in some cases, and some of those connections across borders are very, very poor, very much in need of transformation. So I think what we were all hoping for when the Belt and Road Initiative was announced and first came out was really like to improve this connectivity so that everybody would benefit from improved trade and investment, and everybody's economies could rise together. So the promise was from the Chinese that they would benefit from it. Obviously, they would be looking to benefit, but it would be like boats on a sea, like trying to raise all the boats at the same time, so the Chinese boat goes up and the other boats come with it as we get more integration, more financial integration, more connectivity, and that the Chinese would invest in infrastructure and helping those other poorer countries that have poor infrastructure and really are in need of investment to improve their situation and to benefit everybody. So I think that's what most of us understood from the Belt and Road Initiative, that's what it would do. The Chinese official version says that they're supposed to be focusing on 5 aspects. So they talk about policy coordination, facilities connectivity, unimpeded trade, financial integration, and people-to-people bonds. And I think for me, the problem I have with that is that it seems to me that the first 2 in particular are the main focus of it, right? Coordinating the policy, political, cooperation between leaders is clearly part of it, and improving the connectivity, improving the facilities, infrastructure, and investing in that. I'm not so sure about the other ones. When I first heard the phrase unimpeded trade, what came into my mind was something like the EU, like the trade would just be crossing borders fluidly, and it would be a big zone of cooperation, including a bunch of different countries. But I think I have to point out that what we generally see from the Chinese is not any effort to make a big, trade zone like the EU, or the Russians have introduced the Eurasian Economic Union. We don't really see any steps towards that from the Chinese. And what we see instead is trade deals bilaterally with individual countries. We haven't seen steps towards integrating groups of different countries in a region, right? In terms of the financial structures, we haven't seen that happening. We see always deals being done on a bilateral level. So I think that's one of the issues I have with it, that I expected the Chinese to take more steps towards integration. They really haven't. They haven't been looking to do that. And the other one, the financial integration, we really don't see that at all so far. If that was supposed to be happening through the renminbi, the Chinese yuan, if they were intending that to be a sort of currency for a trade zone, we don't see that. We don't see the yuan as a major international currency yet. Everybody's still focused on the dollar, and if it's not the dollar, then it's the euro, and the renminbi is still not really internationally exchangeable very easily. There are some exceptions, right? There's some greater usage of it, but moving very slowly. And in terms of the people-to-people bonds that were promised, I think there is some of that. We do see the Chinese offering some scholarships to students from developing countries, from Pakistan or from Africa. We do see students going to study in China, and the Chinese offering places to students from developing countries included in the Belt and Road. So I think that part seems to work. But in terms of other people-to-people bonds, in my experience, it's not really taken off. There's not really much happening with that one. So I think what we see so far is, a focus on transport infrastructure, Chinese investment. But I'll come to some of the other problems with what has happened so far. Maybe I'll just stop there for now and hand back to you for another question. There's a lot of other stuff to unpack.
Yes. In this huge infrastructure and other dimension of this project, what is the China trying to achieve with the BRI?
That's the $1,000,000 question, right? What are they trying to achieve? I think different people have different answers to this, and I think as I was saying, what I was hoping in 2015, 2016, what I was really hoping they were trying to achieve was to bring up the economies of developing countries, right? Because the Belt and Road is largely focused on developing countries across Asia towards Central and Eastern Europe. some parts of Africa. The Chinese even expanded it to include South America, right? So it's mostly often generally focused on developing countries. The developed countries are also included, but the main focus of it appears to be in the developing world. So what I was hoping for it was that the Chinese would would invest in developing countries, which they have been investing in building infrastructure in developing countries, and that they would be focusing on building up those economies in order to benefit the Chinese themselves. Obviously, they want to benefit from it. No country is just looking to hand over its resources to other countries. Every country wants to build itself up. So, every country is selfish, self-interested to some extent, and the Chinese are no exception. But what we were hoping was that they would bring the other countries up with them, and it would create synergies between China and other countries to bring developing countries up. I think, unfortunately, what we've seen, where I have to criticize this, what we've seen in the last few years is that there are other aspects to it that are not just about building up economies or building up win-win synergies. There's a lot of talk about win-win cooperation. There's an aspect to it which is ideational, which is about, the Chinese building influence in developing countries, trying to get countries on their side. Now they, at the political level. So although the emphasis has always been on the economics of it, and they've insisted that it's not a political initiative, there are definitely political impacts because the deals that are done are always done at the leadership level, right? So there's a sense in it that the Chinese are saying, we will give you some investment, we will give you some loans to finance that investment, but we're not going to say it openly, but we want to get some influence in your country. The Chinese will say it's all about non-involvement, non-interference, but I think they want support, they want influence in those countries, and they want to make sure that the West is, less influential, particularly the US, right? They want to make sure that they are countering the US. So I think a large part of it that we have to focus on, and it's not just China that's, obviously this is a Chinese initiative, so that's a Chinese focus through this, but it's not as if the US is not doing it as well. The US is doing it in different ways. So I think that what the Chinese are, to a great extent, also doing with the Belt and Road is countering the US and trying to gradually push the US out of these Belt and Road countries, particularly the ones in the Chinese neighborhood, the ones in Asia. So I think particularly with a focus on South Asia, Southeast Asia, Central Asia, perhaps also the Middle East, and then going into Africa. And then they're hoping also to some extent Central and Eastern Europe to try to gradually pick away at the American influence and become more influential in all these regions. So I think there are both economic aspects to it for sure, but there's also these political and ideational aspects that the Chinese do not acknowledge openly, right? I mean, this is not what is on their official agenda, but I think it's definitely present.
Now, from the political dimension or the economic or in terms of the society, has the BRI achieved its goal or objectives so far, or no? What can we say about in the achievements?
Yeah, good question. To what extent has it been successful so far? And that's a really kind of crucial question. How can we assess the success or otherwise of the Belt and Road? I think the best way to do it is to look at specific countries and just see what has happened, Yeah, so one country that I've been focusing on quite closely, because I've just written another book which is coming out about the China-Pakistan economic corridor. So I have a book coming out about that also, if people are interested.
When you are going to publish?
It's coming out in November this year. It's coming out in the publication date is November. So hopefully that's with Routledge again. Yeah.
Hopefully we can make another program about the next upcoming books.
Yeah, we can do that. Yeah. So if I focus on the case of Pakistan and the China-Pakistan economic corridor, and I think it's a good one to focus on because it's often been mentioned as the flagship, right, of the Belt and Road Initiative. In fact, it kind of came out, it kind of appeared. I mean, I think there was talk about it before the Belt and Road. It's kind of, the timeline is a bit confusing, but I think that when the Belt and Road Initiative was coming out, the China-Pakistan economic corridor was already kind of in progress, or they were setting it up. So what happened was that the CPEC was not originally in the Belt and Road, and then they decided, oh yes, this is part of it, and this is the flagship of the Belt and Road. So it's definitely now seen as a kind of major example of the implementation of the Belt and Road. And so what we see with CPEC is, a large program of Chinese investments in Pakistan. We've seen, we see a lot of, it was a lot of talk about, I think they started off with a figure of like 48 billion, and then it went up to 65 billion, or I don't remember the exact figures, but there were these promises of large amounts of investment. And we have seen Chinese investments in Pakistan. There has been a lot of activity in Pakistan. There have been investments in energy projects, transportation projects, Gwadar port. I think there are some other ones as well, but these are the three main areas: energy, transport, Gwadar port. But I think what we have to remember, with CPEC, and what I've tried to emphasize in my book, is that although it's put it forward as an economic corridor, it's benefiting the region, it's supposed to be a game changer, it's supposed to be increasing trade between China and Pakistan. Maybe also Gwadar is supposed to become a regional hub port. Maybe there would be benefits going into Afghanistan, going to Central Asia, maybe with Iran. We have to remember that there's political aspects to it as well. And an important aspect of the China-Pakistan relationship going back to the 1960s is countering India, right? I mean, both China and Pakistan have border disputes with India. They both feel threatened by India. China has a question of Tibet. Pakistan has its border disputes, Kashmir, and so on with India. So we cannot separate CPEC from those political, geopolitical, security considerations. So I think we have to remember that. So when we talk about the success or otherwise of CPEC, we have to remember that I think from both China and Pakistan's perspective, a large part of it that they don't want to talk about, but a large important part of it is the security aspect and countering India, right? But if we look at the detail of the investments themselves, we can see that some progress has been made. The Chinese have put some money in. They have built some dams, some power plants, worked on some mines, but some of it is being slower than expected. And I think we've just recently seen frustrations building up about Gwadar port. There have been demonstrations there about, the Chinese presence. There have been complaints from the Pakistan side. Why is it going so slowly? I just found out recently that all the electricity for Gwadar, we understood that, China was producing the energy for Pakistan through these investments. And I just found out recently that the electricity for Gwadar is being imported from Iran, right? And they have recently had problems with blackouts because of supply. There was a problem with the supply. So when we talk about the success of it, there's some degree of, political aspects to it, security aspects to it, which are not talked about. And the economic aspects, I think, is much more limited, or is going much slower than we were led to believe. And the other thing I want to point out with that is that, again, we understood cross-border connectivity, right, from China to Pakistan, Pakistan to China. The cross-border aspect of it is people don't realize this usually, but it's very undeveloped. It is not working very well. There is only one road crossing from China to Pakistan. If we talk about ships, then obviously there's ships going around. But if we talk about the land border, there's just the same one road, the Karakoram Highway, which has been there since the 1970s. There isn't any new connection going across there. There is no railway going across there. There's no pipelines. They're not even planning a railway or pipelines. And I've even read recently an article I was just reviewing recently was talking about the trade across the border. The regional traders in Pakistan were very optimistic they would get to sell more things in China, but in fact the trade is not taking off, and they are not being allowed to trade, and the Chinese are finding ways to block the products coming across. So the Pakistan side is not benefiting that much from the trade. So I just want to put this as an example because I think it's kind of illustrative of, it's obviously this is a specific one to Pakistan, but we do see similar things happening. I've looked at Iran as well, where there's been this big promise of $400 billion of investment, huge program. But if you look at the record, this promise has been made several times, and the progress on Chinese investments in Iran is much, much slower than what has been promised. And I think what we tend to see through a lot of countries is that the promises, the reality does not match up so far to the promises. We do see some investment coming into countries, but at a slower rate than we were led to believe, as if the Chinese are committed to those countries, are committed, but in a much slower way than what we were led to believe. It's not going as quickly as we were led to believe. I would say this is a deliberate, approach from the Chinese. They want to get influence in these countries. They want to get friends, get some alliances, but they're not prepared to take as many risks and commit as much money to it as it appeared at the beginning, So we can't separate out, they would like to separate out the economics policy. They'd like to say it's just economics, forget the politics, but there's definitely like an economics plus politics aspect to the Belt and Road, which is not emphasized on the Chinese side, but is definitely present.
Now, the following this, the regional, interesting regional dimension, I'm going to ask one international question. That is the most frequent question. Is the BRI threat to the US-led international order?
Is it a threat to the US-led international order? Yes. Well, the US certainly thinks it is. Right? The US definitely sees it that way. They are refusing to participate in it. They definitely see it as a threat. I think the other country that definitely sees it as a threat is India. The Indians have also consistently been refusing to participate in it. So both of those two countries definitely say, yes, this is a threat. This is China trying to spread its, influence, I could say tentacles, right? Its influence. The Indians are worried about this string of pearls, about being surrounded by Chinese ports in the Indian Ocean. The Indians, they've obviously already got the border disputes in the north. So the Indians definitely see it as a threat. The US definitely sees it as an attempt to undermine their, what they call the liberal international order, the US-led order. Europe as well. Europe is kind of mixed. I'm based in Europe, so the Europeans are kind of mixed about this. There's not really a consistent line coming from Europe. I mean, it has been, the Belt and Road. I think the business side of it in Europe, business people are sort of have been keen on it because they wanted to build up, business ties with China. They saw it as an opportunity. But on the political side, there's some politicians that are very favorable to it and others very, very critical who definitely see it as a threat. So there's a very kind of mixed reception of the Belt and Road in Europe, which doesn't really help things, that it's sort of a very confused situation. I mean, not just Western Europe, but even where I'm in Prague, obviously Central and Eastern Europe. The Central and Eastern Europeans have, I think initially were quite keen on it. They thought they were going to get a lot of business opportunities. But again, going back to your previous question, has it been successful? Central and Eastern Europe, people have not seen as many benefits from it as they thought they would. There's not been the amount of investment here that people expected. So especially in the Czech Republic, where I am, I've talked to a lot of Czech people about this. And a lot of Czech people feel as if they've just been used, they've just been exploited, they've just been sort of or not even used or exploited, but just not respected, right? They've not been respected, and that the investment that's come in has not been what was promised, and they've been lied to, basically. Not everybody, but some quite large proportion, influential part of the population, especially in Prague, feels that way. On the other hand, the Czech President Zeman, is very pro-China, has been welcoming the Belt and Road, welcoming ties with China. So there's a sort of confused aspect to it in Europe. So to go back to your question, I'm trying to answer the question, is it a threat to the American order? I guess we have to say yes, it is. Although the Chinese would say we're not trying to undermine the American order, I think there's evidence to show that they are trying to gradually pick away, what in English we call it salami slicing, but the Chinese call it cabbage slicing, right? Where you just slice off a bit more and a bit more and a bit more. So before anybody notices, you've sliced off 1%, 2%, and you get up to 25%. They're just gradually slicing away at the American order. And I think I've seen evidence. I'm reading a very good book by Rush Doshi, he's a scholar in the US who has now been included, I think, in the Biden administration. Yes, very good book. Very, very good book. I haven't finished reading. I've read half of it or so, but he's very persuasive about looking at Chinese sources. He's looked at a lot of sources in Chinese, a lot of official or semi-official sources, and his evidence suggests that this has really been a deliberate Chinese strategy since about 1990 to undermine the US order. So for the US, it's certainly a threat. The question is it a threat for everybody else? Is it because from the US perspective, it's a threat. From the Western perspective, it looks like a threat. But for the developing countries who have not really benefited from the US order, right? So, if we're going to come to it probably, but, has Afghanistan benefited from US leadership? So 20 years of US leadership. Can we say that this mission of the US in Afghanistan that they're now leaving, has this been a success? It doesn't really look like a success. I'm trying to be diplomatic. It looks like a failure, right? So from Afghanistan's perspective, is it better to stick with the US, or is it better to to turn to China? Which one are they going to do? Are they going to do any worse with China than they did with the US? And it might be from their perspective, they might think, well, it looks, maybe we're not going to commit to China 100%, but maybe it can't be any worse than what the Americans did. For us economically and building our society, we need something else. So I guess it depends on the perspective you're looking from. But I think in terms of the Belt and Road undermining the US-led order, I think that is what they are trying to pick away at the American-led order. Yeah, I'm kind of persuaded about that. Yeah.
Jeremy, amid this the complex situation, can BRI be characterized as a debt trap diplomacy? Because many countries, when we're talking about BRI or the nature of BRI, some countries says we get a lot of benefit, but some others talking another thing. As a researcher of BRI, what is your observation on this subject?
It's an interesting question which has been discussed a lot, and it's kind of a very controversial one. It's one I have to be very careful about because in the media, there's been a lot of talk about debt trap diplomacy. There's the case that is often put forward is the Sri Lankan case, where we have this Hambantota port, where it appeared as if the Chinese first gave a loan, built the port up. The Sri Lankans couldn't repay the money, so the Chinese said, "Oh, okay, never mind, give us the port." And so they acquired something. And this is kind of what is taken to be the classic case of debt trap diplomacy. And I know that, the former prime minister of Malaysia was also complaining about this issue. From a scholarly perspective, I haven't written on this, I haven't published on this, but I've read papers where scholars have been saying that they think the debt trap diplomacy hypothesis is not correct, right? They're saying that the Sri Lankan case was just an isolated case. There aren't any other cases which really support the hypothesis. The Chinese have not really been building up debt and then acquiring assets through the debt, through replacing the debt with acquisition of an asset. The scholars have pointed out that this debt trap diplomacy is exaggerated. What I would like to say about that is I'd like to kind of replace it. I'd like to say, instead of talking about debt trap diplomacy, let's talk about Chinese investments, Chinese use of loans for investments and infrastructure as a way of gaining influence, right? I think they are using investments backed by loans from Chinese state institutions, investments which are infrastructure projects usually built by Chinese state-owned companies. So they're using Chinese state-owned finance institutions like Exim Bank. They're using Chinese state companies, sometimes private companies, to build the infrastructure. So the money is kind of passing, from a Chinese state institution to the country, but it's going immediately back to a Chinese company, either private or state-owned. The money is circulating back around into the Chinese pockets, and what they are building up is political influence in those countries, because those deals are generally done with leaders in those countries. And I think what they're getting in return is they're not necessarily, they may be some cases, there's some asset or they're getting some influence over some piece of territory or some port, or they're getting a control of a port for some time, like in Gwadar. But that's not maybe the main thing they're trying to achieve. The main thing they're trying to achieve is getting more influence in those countries. And I think that the debt that is developing with those countries is generating influence for China, right? But at the same time, the Chinese are not foolish with their money, right? They want to get returns on their money. They don't want to throw their money away. They don't want to lose their money. So they obviously want something back for their loans and their investment and their money. So I think what they're trying to get back is influence in those countries and push, as I said before, pushing the US gradually out, right? So I would look at it in that way. I think I would not, be careful not to use the Sri Lankan case as a kind of, example of what is going on everywhere, because it's kind of hard to match it up, but definitely gaining influence, right?
Jeremy, in this aspect, I would like to ask about the Pakistani case. How does the CPEC can fit into the BRI, or what is the CPEC for?
What is CPEC for? Yeah, well, as I said, as I sort of jumped the gun, I was talking about CPEC already. I think CPEC is, as I say, I think it has a more kind of security or geopolitical aspect to it. I mean, I think as far as the Chinese and the Pakistanis are concerned, it's about maintaining their relationship, building up Pakistan as far as possible from the Chinese perspective, building up Pakistan as much as possible, because as we know, Pakistan is a country with a pretty large population. I mean, 200 million plus people in Pakistan, large population. It's a country that China wants to get on its side. It needs an ally against India, a rival. Pakistan also obviously has India. So Pakistan has, had an economic situation which has been very poor, for decades. They've had very poor economic development. They are badly in need of investment. They're badly in need of, there are a lot of power cuts, blackouts. The transport infrastructure has not been as good as they would wish. And they needed to build up the economy and the infrastructure. So I think it is for that. It is for building up Pakistan. The Chinese want to build up Pakistan as far as possible. They want Pakistan on their side. They don't want a weak Pakistan. They want Pakistan to be stronger so that it's as a counter to India, right? And they also would not mind, I think, having a base like Gwadar on the Indian Ocean, because China does not have access to the Indian Ocean in its territory. they like to have some access, some base on the Indian Ocean, and if it would be possible to connect up through Pakistan to China, which, as I said, at the moment the connection is not, that Karakoram highway, Kunjarab Pass, is closed 4 or 5 months in the winter, so it's not a very reliable connection. But if they could get a connection going, they would be happy about that. But I think what CPEC, CPEC is portrayed as an economic corridor, that it's connecting Pakistan to Xinjiang, that it's building up the connections between Pakistan and Xinjiang, the trade connections and so on. I think it's really not, if you look at the detail, it's really not working out that way at all. It's not working out that way. And if you look at CPEC projects, it's all focused in Pakistan. We don't see anything listed about what's going on in Xinjiang. I mean, the Chinese are investing in Xinjiang and building things up, but we don't see those projects listed in the CPEC website or listed in the official materials. It's all about Pakistan only. So I think when we hear these tales about the cross-border connectivity and the building up Xinjiang and Pakistan, I think we have to take a little bit of a pinch of salt, because I think if you look at the detail of what's happening, it's not really developing like that, and it's more about just what is going on in Pakistan and China's, again, influence in Pakistan. Because as we know, the Pakistani military is Pakistan is a democracy. They have elections, but the military, if you look at Pakistan's history, the military is very strong in Pakistan. If the elected government, displeases the military, we've seen it in Pakistan's history that they've been overthrown, right? Elected governments have been overthrown on several occasions in Pakistan's history, and the democratically elected governments have to be careful about keeping the military on side. The military also is quite closely connected to the Chinese military and Chinese government, and there's a lot going on in the background that we don't hear about, we don't hear any information about, but that's also going on in there as well. So it's about, CPEC is mainly about what's going on in Pakistan, and Chinese having some influence in Pakistan and what's happening, and the Pakistani military and the Pakistani elites and things like that. So it's very complex, but I think we have to bear in mind that it's not just, there's economics in it, but there's also a lot of politics in it and a lot of security aspects.
I think it's more than complex.
Yeah, it's quite complex. I tried to cover this in my book, but I think what people don't realize is, or don't take into account, is that, people will label Pakistan as a democracy, right? I mean, they'll say it's a democracy, and it is. They have a democratically elected government, their Prime Minister Imran Khan, but the military, if you look at the history going back to the foundation of Pakistan, the military has been very, very strong. They've had democratically elected governments have been replaced by military dictatorships several times, and several times there have been coups. The military is a very strong force in Pakistan, holding Pakistan together, and I think you have to look at that aspect of it, and you have to look at the security and geopolitical aspects, and the fact that Pakistan is actually quite a fragile country. It's the Punjabis are the biggest portion of the population, and they're the ones that control government, but you have these other minorities such as the Sinds, the Balochs, and the Pashtuns, and these ones are kind of excluded from the power structures, and the military is holding this whole thing together. So quite a complex situation. Yeah.
Jeremy, my another question would be, is the CEE region important for BRI, and is the 17+1 intended to divide and conquer Europe?
Good questions again. Yeah, I mean, is the CEE region important for the BRI? This is what we were led to believe around about 2015, 2016. In 2016, President Xi Jinping came to Prague, came to the Czech Republic. We were led to believe that the Czech Republic, for example, was going to be a very important country in the Belt and Road. It was going to be kind of maybe bridgehead to Western Europe. My conclusion, to be honest, from looking at the evidence, and this is what I have in my book, my conclusion is that the CEE region is not really that important for the Belt and Road. I mean, this is maybe a lot of people would kind of dispute it, but if you look at the evidence of the investments and so on, the amount of investment by China in CEE is much less than in Western Europe, right? I mean, there's much, even in terms of proportion of the investment in the whole of Europe, CEE is getting proportionally less investment than Western Europe. Why is that? I think the reason is because CEE doesn't really have that much that the Chinese want, right? There's not really that many logical reasons for the Chinese to come in here. Central and Eastern Europe is not rich in natural resources, doesn't have much oil or gas, or, there's some coal, but, or something like that, but China's got plenty of coal. It doesn't really have much that the Chinese would need. Western Europe has more because Western Europe has more, more advanced companies, more advanced technologies. It has a lot of technologies that the Chinese would like to invest in, get access to. And obviously other parts of Asia have more that the Chinese want. If you look at the Middle East, obviously the Middle East has oil, gas, right? It's obvious why the Chinese would want to go in there and invest in the oil extraction and make sure they got their oil supply coming. CEE doesn't really have, there's not really as much logic to the region of why the Chinese would want to be heavily invested here. So for me, I would say CEE is less important to China than some of the other regions. As I said, Middle East. I think the Middle East is far more important to China because of the oil, oil, natural gas, far more important. Central Asia also more important because you have oil, you have gas, you have other stuff. Even Afghanistan could be more important. They have a lot of natural resources that the Chinese could exploit, although the political situation is difficult, so we'll wait and see. But there are other regions that have more that the Chinese want. They are closer to China. There's more potential for China getting influence. They're more important. Now, is China trying to divide and conquer Europe? The conclusion I came to in one article I wrote is that they are not really trying to divide and conquer. I mean, they're kind of, in a way, always dividing and conquering with all their deals that they do, because every country they deal with it's almost always bilateral trade deals, bilateral investment deals with individual countries. So in a way, China is dividing and conquering everywhere, right? Is it trying to divide and conquer the EU? I don't think that was their intention. I don't think they want to see the EU breaking up. I think they're happy to see the EU as a bloc, and I don't think they want to break it into pieces. But on the other hand, I think they see CEE as a region which they feel they can get more influence in than Western Europe, because Western Europe is stronger, it's more developed, it doesn't maybe need them as much. I think they see CEE as a former communist countries. They see them as a region in which they would like to get more influence, and there's more potential for influence. So I think there's that, but I don't think they are trying to break up the EU or something like this. I don't think it has any logic to it that they would be trying to do that. But dividing and conquering, you could argue that's what the Chinese do everywhere, that they do. They try to get individual countries on their side and gradually grind down the other side, or the American order or the Western order. They're trying to gradually, as I said, slice the cabbage, So to some extent, but I think they're not looking to break up the EU.
Jeremy, you mentioned about the importance of the Middle East in this aspect. I would like to ask about the importance of Iran in the Belt and Road Initiative. What can you tell us about the importance of Iran?
Importance of Iran, I think it's kind of a strange one, Iran, like in terms of the Belt and Road, in terms of China. Because there's a lot, it's quite complicated, because again, Iran has, on paper, it looks like Iran would be a very good partner for China, right? They have oil, they have a good position. If you look at the map, geographically, the position looks good on the Persian Gulf, would be a good partner right in the oil-rich region. Iran itself has oil. They can connect. It's actually possible to connect through Xinjiang and through Central Asia, or maybe possibly even through Afghanistan into Iran. It's possible to connect. They've already sent trains from China to Tehran, so it is possible already to connect with Iran. It looks like a good partner. It looks like, and it's also on the way to Europe as well. You can get around through Iran, through Turkey, and you can get to Europe over land. So it looks like a good partner. The difficulty is that Iran, there's two difficulties really. One difficulty is that Iran is seen as a pariah state by the West. The US administration doesn't trust Iran. They have very bad history with Iran. They see Iran, the US sees Iran, or has seen, I don't know, Biden administration so far is not talking about it, right? But definitely under Trump and under previous administrations, Iran was seen as, Obama tried to, set up the JCPOA, the Iran nuclear deal, and deal with this. But under Trump, it broke down again, and Iran was again seen as the enemy. So there's these really bad relations between Iran and the US. And this affects China because if China commits heavily to Iran, then China is putting itself in the enemy camp as well, right? And so this is one problem, is the US, and the other problem is Saudi Arabia, right? Because China really needs Saudi Arabia. They really need the Saudi oil. It's a really vital oil supplier for them. I think it's even their biggest oil supplier. The US is taking less oil now from Saudi Arabia, and China is getting more. So China really needs Saudi Arabia. Unfortunately for Iran, Saudi Arabia is Iran's biggest regional rival, right? They're big regional rivals in the Persian Gulf, really quite bitter enemies with lots of proxy wars going on in Yemen and in Syria and so on, very complex stuff. So the problem is for China-Iran that if China commits very heavily to Iran, then it's damaging its relations with the US and it's damaging its relations with Saudi Arabia. So it's difficult for China to just wholeheartedly commit to Iran. They would like to, but then the further problem is potential instability in Iran, which is it's risky to maybe invest in there too much. So I think the answer is that Iran on paper looks like a good partner for China, and I think China thinks, yeah, we would like to be there, we would like to be them to be a partner, but they don't dare to overextend and to commit too much to Iran because of the problems I outlined with the US and Saudi Arabia.
I'm going to ask one more updated question about Afghanistan. What is the China's approach will be to Taliban-led Afghanistan likely to be, or how we can say Afghanistan can include to the BRI?
Again, a good question. When I was asked to write an article about this last week, so I just published a short article on this. My view of it would be that for the Chinese, they definitely, they have a very keen awareness of history, right? They are really keen students of history. The leaders, the Chinese leaders, I mean, they look at the historical lessons, and they regard Afghanistan as a graveyard of empires. First of all, Britain had problems in Afghanistan we can say this is a long time ago, it's 100 years ago or more. Okay, that's distant past, but you don't have to even go back to Britain. You can just look at Russia, right? Russia occupied Afghanistan from 1979 to 1989, completely failed. They completely failed to pacify Afghanistan, suffered a lot of casualties, lost a lot of material, spent a lot of money. And what happened to Russia? Well, at that time, not even Russia, Soviet Union, right? It's not before we had Russia, it was the Soviet Union. What happened to the Soviet Union? The Soviet Union, not directly, just not solely because of Afghanistan, but this contributed to weakening the Soviet Union economically, and the Soviet Union collapsed, right? But even apart from that, the Soviets, Russia, the Russians totally failed in Afghanistan. It totally failed. It drained their resources completely. Complete disaster. Now we look at the US example, 20 years of US occupation. US has spent a lot of money on it, a lot of manpower they put there, and now we just see them leaving in a really incredibly chaotic way, I would say, like very, very. I would never have predicted there would be such chaos in the departure from Afghanistan. I mean, it was maybe easy to see that the Taliban was going to take over, or the Taliban is going to be the dominant force there again, but I would never have predicted that the US would just be sort of running away and leaving, and that's it, you know? So I think with the Chinese, the point I want to make is the Chinese looking at this would be thinking, we are not going to do the same thing that the Russians and the Americans did. We are not going to be at all like over-committing to Afghanistan. We're not going, let's let the dust settle. Let's see what's happening. They have already met and negotiated with Taliban leaders. So they are trying to build relations with the Taliban. They see the Taliban as the next government of Afghanistan. They're trying to build good relations. They would like to invest in Afghanistan, I think. They would like to build up the Belt and Road. But they are not fools, and they're not going to just risk their capital and risk their people if they think that it's not a good bet, if they think it's not a good investment. And what we've seen already, there's evidence of this already, that the Chinese company has already been developing, or supposed to be developing, an Afghan copper mine since about 2008. And this investment has gone absolutely nowhere, right? There's been very little progress on this copper mine. It's not really gone anywhere. So what we see up to now, the evidence suggests that the Chinese are going to be very cautious about committing to Afghanistan. I think they would like to include it. They see a lot of potential in the natural resources there. They see it as a good connecting point, as I said, to Iran, good connection to Iran, good connection to Central Asia and Pakistan. Very good, looks very good on the map, has good natural resources, but with such an unstable political situation, they will be pretty cautious, and we can be sure that they will not be, you know, if anybody's thinking they will be putting their army in there or something, I very much doubt it, because they learned the lessons from Russia and the US, and they would not be seeking to immediately dominate Afghanistan. They'll be very cautious, I think.
Jeremy, I think we have a few questions. I'm going to bring on screen. Yes, this is about the latest development in Pakistan, CPEC, the attack on the Chinese people. Great question. The terror attack in CPEC investment in Pakistan. Yeah, we saw. There was the attack. I think you're talking about, at least there have been several attacks, right? There have been several attacks recently. There was the attack on the bus, where we saw the bus that fell into the ravine, and I think there were something like 6 Chinese engineers killed. This was a very serious incident. The Chinese took this very seriously, and they saw this as a big problem, right? I mean, for the Chinese, this is what I'm connecting to what I just said about Afghanistan as well. The Chinese take this very seriously, and don't, you know, this is discouraging the Chinese. If the Chinese think that their people are in danger, and there's going to be a lot of negative publicity about Chinese citizens being killed in Pakistan, and risk to them, risk to the investments, they are going to be thinking twice about whether to continue or not, you know. And so we saw, after that one, we saw a suspension of that project. You know, they were working on a project there, and the project was temporarily suspended. Now, maybe they'll continue with it, but it definitely doesn't encourage the Chinese to commit more resources to Pakistan. And then we've just recently seen, I believe there's been a terror attack on a convoy of cars or something. I didn't get the details exactly, but there's been another terror attack actually in Gwadar as well. And I believe there was even an attempt on the Chinese ambassador, which failed or something like that. So there've been several attacks on the Chinese in Pakistan. This is again just indicative of the problems of CPEC, right? This is also another aspect of the problems of CPEC. That, you know, if you read a lot of the media, Pakistani media or Chinese media, or a lot of media reports have come out, even in Western media, you get an impression that it's all going really well and it's all really smooth. There's a lot of problems, and one of the major problems, as I said before, is that
Pakistan is basically run by the Punjabi elites, the military civil elites, and basically in Islamabad and in Lahore, right, are basically running Pakistan, and they're not really including the minority. So Gwadar port is in Balochistan, and the Balochs are not feel like they're excluded from the power structures of Pakistan. So this is just indicative of the problems that CPEC has structurally in Pakistan. So I think the terror attacks, it's a bad sign for the Chinese, right? Okay, we've got another question there. What about the digital yuan? Can it be used in other countries, for example, BRI countries? That's a good question. I'm not a financial expert, so I can't really answer that very closely. But I think what we do see is that the yuan, the Chinese have talked about internationalizing the yuan and having a digital yuan, and we don't see it happening very quickly, right? We see the implementation of it's very slow. So I'm not sure that they are going to hurry with this, right? I don't think we can have very high expectations of this happening quickly. I mean, to answer in brief, I don't think it's going to happen that quickly. I think the record so far, I expected that kind of thing to be, Chinese can implement things very quickly if they want to. They have not implemented it quickly, which means I think they see it as a risk for them to be spreading the yuan. If they spread the yuan through a lot of countries, that's increasing their risk in all those countries. They get financial problems in those countries. That's giving them more risk. So I think they're going to be quite cautious about spreading that internationally. In the short run, maybe in the long run, but I think you're really looking at a long way ahead. I don't see it happening soon.
Now we have last two questions. I bring on the screen now.
Right. Okay. So Emre Demir, I think I know him. I think a little bit. I've seen yeah. So what would be his ideas on including Turkey to the 16+1 initiative? Oh, okay. Would it be useful for Turkey in its relations with China? So including Turkey in the 16+1. That's an interesting idea. I haven't seen anybody so far mention that, right? So I don't know if that is on the cards. And I don't know if the Chinese would want it to be on the cards. I think, the problem with it would be, living here in Central and Eastern Europe I think the Central and Eastern Europeans would not probably be excited about it, right? I mean, even if the Chinese would think it was a good idea, I think the Central and Eastern Europeans would be not happy about Turkey being in it. I mean, there's already some problems. I guess this year with the 16, we were calling it the 17+1. I guess now we are back to the 16+1 because Lithuania is supposed to have pulled out, right? So it's not even clear that is it 17 or 16 at the moment. We added Greece, right? Greece is in it now, but Lithuania technically said they're pulling out. The other Baltic states, Estonia and Latvia, also don't seem to be very keen on it, right? So there's sort of splits within the CEE, within the 16+1 already. So this question of adding Turkey at the moment, I don't know. I don't think they're going to probably try that because there's so much, they've got such problems like coordinating between the Central and Eastern European countries already that I don't think they're going to add anybody. Would it be useful for Turkey in its relations with China? Maybe. I don't know, but it might be more useful for Turkey in relations with Europe. I mean, it might assist it, or it might not, or it might, I don't know. It's really hard to say with that one. But I think we can say it's probably not. I haven't seen anything about it. It's probably not on the cards. I doubt it.
Now the last question, Jeremy.
Okay, so we got a graduate student from the University of Tehran. Well, I mean, by the way, welcome to everybody. I'm really happy to see that we have people listening. and people, I'm really happy to see we have people not just from the West, people from all around the world, all around the Belt and Road countries, all around Asia. It's really good to, get a dialogue going, because, I'm a scholar, and a lot of time you feel like the whole tendency is everything is just coming from the US, coming from Britain, coming from Western Europe. And it's really good to see people from other parts of the world contributing and being interested. So, graduate student from the University of Tehran. I wanted to ask about the interplay between Belt and Road and the SCO. Those who don't know, that's the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. That's the organization that includes China, Russia, and the Central Asian states, and it also now includes India and Pakistan. They concern different fields, trade, security, but I hear Chinese colleagues talk about them as interrelated. Okay, that's really interesting that you have Chinese colleagues and you're talking about them. The fact that you are hearing your Chinese colleagues talking about them as interrelated, that's significant. That's already significant. I would say they are interrelated. I mean, I would say the SCO did have a big security focus initially, but it's kind of gone beyond that. I think it's also focused on economic cooperation. I think it is focused on security, but its remit has become broader. I think the Belt and Road and the SCO, they are connected, and I think the Chinese are trying to connect them and coordinate them. And as I said before, they're trying to undermine US influence. And both of these, the SCO as an organization, the Belt and Road as an initiative. I mean, they're different. One is an organization and one is an initiative. So it's kind of different levels. But in both cases, they are trying to increase their influence and reduce the American influence. And both of these, the SCO does not include America, does not include Western countries. So it's definitely them trying to establish a different bloc, right? And the Belt and Road, which they're not saying they're excluding Western countries, but the Americans refuse to participate. So I would see them as connected. Belt and Road, as I said, is supposed to be focused on trade and economics only, but it definitely has political aspects. The SCO is supposed to be focused on security and political relations, but it definitely also has economic aspects. So I think they are overlapping. Yeah.
Jeremy, I said last two questions, but another question is coming now.
Okay, we can keep going. I'm fine. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, Matu Al Faisal saying, what is the US attempts to stop the Belt and Road? Okay, interesting question, because it's an interesting question because with the Biden administration, I'd say with the, under the Obama or Trump administration, I mean, the Obama administration, well, that came in before the Belt and Road started. So I think Obama obviously couldn't be focused on Belt and Road because it didn't come in until he was near the end. So he wasn't really focused on that. But Trump was trying to stop it through this trade war, right? So I think Trump's trade war was his attempt to stop the Belt and Road and stop China. That was his attempt. Don't think it really worked very well. What we see from Biden, and we don't really know how this is going to work out, but we saw this a few months ago. We saw this mention of, I don't know if you've heard of the B3W. What is it? B3W, I think it's called, right? Building a better world or something like this that they have. So the Biden administration is saying that they want to set up a rival initiative to the Belt and Road. And I think they're definitely referencing, if they were not referencing the Belt and Road, it was very clear that it was a reaction to the Belt and Road. What they've said so far is they're inviting partners to discuss it, and they're going to hammer out the details of it in the autumn, in September or so. So we don't really know what it is, but we know that Biden is intending to build up something that's going to rival the Belt and Road. So there is, I would say, something coming from the US. It's just a question of what form is it going to take? What are they going to do? Are they going to be as ambitious as the Chinese, or are they going to take a different approach? Presumably they will try to, Chinese get accused of not being transparent with the investments. We don't see the financial details, which I think is a valid criticism. We don't see the accounts published. So the Americans may focus on being more transparent with investments. Let's hope that they do, develop some investments in developing countries so that we see a more coordinated approach from the West to the developing world and to investment and infrastructure development in the developing world, because that's what's been lacking. That's why the Chinese have been filling that gap, because the West has not been clear on it. I mean, it's not like there aren't Western investments, but it's not coordinated, right? It's not been coordinated so far. So I think we're going to see something coming from the Biden administration, but we have to wait and see what it is.
Jeremy, very sorry. I just want to make a small comment or question related to this latest question. What China will do about the protected overseas investment, like the BRI? China can send the police forces or PLA to protect it as the national or investments?
You mean to protect Chinese investments overseas? Yeah. This is something where I think this is why they probably don't commit as much as they could a lot of the time. I think they're worried about their investments being targeted, being attacked.
Latest situation in Pakistan and another part of Africa, there is several happened on the Chinese infrastructure and the company, I think.
Yeah, if Chinese citizens and projects and companies get targeted, how do they protect them? It's a very, very good question. And as we see in Pakistan, what they've been relying on, because they don't want to commit soldiers there, they don't want to be seen to be committing forces in other countries. They keep repeating, apart from the UN peacekeepers, where the Chinese have sent a lot of forces, they don't send any other forces overseas. They don't want to be seen to be having their own soldiers in Pakistan, because then they'll get a lot of negative publicity. They'll get publicity like, they're trying to control Pakistan, and Pakistan is just a Chinese vassal state. So they don't want to put soldiers into Pakistan. So this means they are depending on the Pakistani army, Pakistan's security forces, to protect their investments and protect their personnel. And I think where the Chinese are getting worried about this is they feel that the Pakistan side, the Pakistani army, is not doing a good enough job at protecting their citizens and their investments. So I think they're worried about this. And I think where they try to get some influence in it is behind the scenes. They're trying to push the army of Pakistan to put more resources into it, but they don't want to put their own resources into it. And I think the same with other investments around the world. They don't want to be seen to be putting their military into those situations at the moment. Now the question is, will it continue like that? I think we have seen that the Chinese have put a military base in Djibouti in East Africa, but so have some of the others. The US has a base there. I think some other countries have bases there as well. So it's not unique to China, but we do see at least some kind of build-up like that, a little bit. I don't think we're going to see in the short term the China putting forces into all these countries to protect their investments. But I think we will see them, if there are problems, we will see them trying to use local forces to protect. But let's wait. Who knows what the situation will be 10 years from now. Maybe if the Chinese are feeling more confident, they might be trying to expand their military bases elsewhere. But we definitely, at the moment, we don't see that, and I don't expect that at all.
Okay, thank you very much, Jeremy. There is no more question.
Thank you too. I'm glad that we had some good questions. Thanks to the viewers for some interesting questions. I'm happy to get some reaction.
Thank you very much for providing beautiful about the Belt and Road Initiative. Also, thank you very much for the audiences and those who asked the question. See you in the next program.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Lokman, for inviting me. I'm very happy to discuss this with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeremy.